Welcome back to the Inner Practice Podcast, where we explore healing, resilience, and the practices that help us reconnect with ourselves and one another. I'm your host, Jackie Vandertuin. In part one of my conversation with Jen Lindgren, we explored the deeply personal story that led her to her work with the Prison Yoga Project, of how growing up with a father who was incarcerated shaped the path she walks today. In the second part of our conversation, we turn our attention to the work itself. Jen is a trauma-informed educator and director of training with the Prison Yoga Project, a global nonprofit organization that brings trauma-informed yoga and mindfulness practices into correctional facilities around the world. Their programs are grounded in the understanding that many incarcerated individuals carry histories of complex trauma, and that healing and rehabilitation must address the nervous system and the lived experiences that shape their lives. Through breath, movement, and embodied awareness, these programs offer tools for emotional regulation, self-awareness, and personal transformation, skills that support both individual healing and the safer communities when people return home. In 2025, Jen was honored with the Leadership Award at the New Hampshire Department of Corrections Volunteer Appreciation Banquet, presented in grateful recognition of her selfless service and commitment to bringing healing-centered program into correctional facilities. In this episode, we explore what it really looks like to bring trauma-informed yoga into prisons. We'll ask questions of who are the people inside these facilities, what trauma and social conditions shape their lives, and how do practices like yoga and mindfulness change the experience of incarceration. This conversation invites us to look beyond stereotypes and statistics, to see humanity, resilience, and possibility that exists even within systems built around punishment. I'm grateful you're here for this conversation. And Jen, I am truly so excited that you are here, that we can continue our conversation from part one.
Wonderful. I'm so happy to be here, Jackie. Thank you so very much.
Jen, you talked in part one about walking into a prison that your father was incarcerated in and seeing it through the eyes of an adult. Now, my dad was a corrections officer, but whenever I went to see him at work, I only went so far, and I never saw inside. So for listeners who may never have stepped inside a correctional facility, how would you describe walking through a prison for the first time? And then maybe you can share with us about the people who make up the prison population.
Oh, absolutely. And just to kind of express that every facility is a little bit different. So just to honor that as well. And I too had only had the experience prior of really going into that visiting room that's set up to be a little bit more welcoming. There's still, metal detectors and guards and things there, but it's a much different environment in that kind of visiting room than when you're going in. So in each of the facilities that I enter, first off, it's locked down. So to be, granted permission to kind of be and welcomed in, or to be let into the facility through, this lock bolted door that is very loud, going into the space where, the individuals, the officers who are checking you in, or the civilian staff, are behind protected glass plates. I am not allowed to bring in any personal possessions other than what's been cleared to come in. So some of the facilities that I'm in, I'm allowed to bring in, a bag with my yoga mat. I do bring in some additional props and things to some of the facilities, but all of my possessions are searched. I have to go through a metal detector, and really to again show my identity, to be checked off that I'm on the approved list to be able to go in. Really very intrusive, sort of right from the beginning, and you're in this presence that as soon as you walk on campus, you can see that there are armed guards in different towers. You can, get an idea of there's barbed wire everywhere. There's these spaces where it's not a welcoming environment. A lot of, in New Hampshire, the facilities that we teach at, one of the buildings was built in the 1800s. It's still a very old brick building. There's a lot of shifting and as far as the electricity and the heat and all the things are not always working. Some of the other facilities are newer, and again have a little bit of a a lighter paint tone, but there's still the noise, the jangling of keys the officers are wearing, the Sally Port doors that are slamming, as you come in and before you leave. Not a very welcoming environment, and certainly not an environment conducive to therapy and to rehabilitation and to community. Everywhere we go, someone is constantly watching. There's cameras everywhere. Like I said, there's officers everywhere who are armed constantly and coming into these spaces. So a little intimidating as well.
Yeah.
And to even not lose that intimidation that, now it's been almost a decade that I've been going in a variety of different facilities. But there's still, this feeling of where we're going into, that it's a completely different world, and it's not like any other, not like going into a studio or a community center where we're coming into these spaces.
Yeah, I mean, the listeners can't see, but you touched your heart. And as you're describing it, um, I was overcome with this sense of, because as you're describing it, I'm mentally walking through of fear, of sadness, of almost the sense of it's just a complete disassociation from the green grass that I see outside of my house. I'm thinking of movies that I've seen. Um, can like how similar is it to a movie and to real life? Because I would assume that some similarities, but vastly different.
Yeah, I mean, I think that those who create media, have, maybe they've done some research or some lived experience, but um, you can't capture the feeling, the emotion, the things that I think to come in, again, one of the facilities I go into, we're entering through, this one hallway and have to go through, a barred door to enter. And then where I offer the program is on the other side of the yard. So walking through the yard where individuals are in a lot of facilities. And again, I only have the experience of being in New Hampshire facilities, but I have been in some other states and areas. But the shift of movement happens. Everything is on such a very deliberate schedule for individuals. So my programs are kind of scheduled where I arrive at the facility, go through the whole check-in process, and then am escorted to the location where we're teaching. So again, in some of the facilities, we're physically walking through the yard to then go into the area where the yoga program happens, and seeing the other individuals who are, some have jobs during the day, some are going to study, some are going to just back to their cells and their areas, coming in. Everyone is dressed the same, coming in uniform. Again, there's this presence of the officers that are always there of where you're going. Another facility, it's a very long hallway, and I arrive at the same time that there's a medication call. So there are individuals who are lined up to be able to go to medical to take their meds. But even in coming into that and where sort of the human aspect starts, there were some facilities when I first started that even the new administration has come in now, but that even making eye contact was frowned upon and was seen as sort of an issue. So everyone is sort of walking the halls with their eyes cast down and not wanting to make eye contact. And that, again, was very early on in my facilitation that right away kind of took that humanness away. Thankfully, in the almost 10 years, that has even been a shift where there's much more of a focus. So now even going in, individuals are saying hello and saying good morning. And, I'm starting to be recognized as, the yoga lady who comes in and talking about, coming into your class later, I have to do this. So there's even a shift in that, but it's still a prison. It's still, I'm not walking by sort of cells and things that I think a lot of times in the movies you kind of have the hall of cells and people hanging out, and not that that doesn't exist, but it's certainly not as an individual going into the space to hold a program, not an environment that I'm exposed to as much, but you can certainly look up and see the windows with bars everywhere. And again, you're in this little microcosm of space where there's many layers of fences and barbed wire, and again, the armed guards coming into the space. So again, movies and media can give us an experience. Our nervous system is certainly observing
Yeah.
something coming into that, but the sights, the smells, the noises, I don't think that there's a as accurate a comparison.
Yeah. You know, one of the things I love about the Prison Yoga Project is it posts pictures. So if you're not on Instagram, listeners, please check out the Prison Yoga Project because the pictures are absolutely beautiful from a photographic experience. But in my mind, I see this man doing a supported side plank in a 6 foot wall, and it looks like it's about 3 feet wide. So he's got his bed, he's in a side plank, like literally, he couldn't do a full plank because there's no room. And it really brought me to, oh my gosh, could I physically and mentally live in that room? And again, like very emotional when I see these pictures and when you see the faces of these individuals who are incarcerated as well. Jen, I've been telling people that I'm speaking to you, and I get a lot of mixed reaction from people who are like, really? They do yoga in prisons? And this bothers me to say that, but I think people were it's a population that we don't even think about. That it's, oh, I thought, I never think about someone who's in a prison, which is one of the reasons why I want to do this podcast so much, because they're humans. And I kind of hate this question a little bit, but can you talk about the people who are in prisons? And I want to say what is similar, what is different. And I don't know if that's the right question to ask, but I'm trying to put a face, trying to put a human aspect on this. So can you describe someone like a typical prisoner in who's incarcerated?
Yeah, I mean, I think first there's just the language that individuals, they are humans who are experiencing incarceration, who have had, either through their own involvement, are definitely, have committed some type of crime, had not had what they needed, or just felt otherwise, and they're coming into the space. But they're every single person who's incarcerated is someone's child. Most of the individuals who are incarcerated are someone's parent, or brother, or sister, or uncle, grandparent. Um, I see my friends and family and the individuals who I serve who are incarcerated every day, going through, especially as an individual who, myself personally has a lived experience of trauma. I see my friends in different stages of their lives who, had and committed some type of offense or harmed someone, um, but are also seeking this pathway of reconnection to self. There's individuals who, find themselves incarcerated. Very rarely is it because, everything was coming together in their life before. Many, many, many individuals are multi-generation of being incarcerated, where, it's just the experience where they knew their grandparents or their parents, have also had this experience, and a great lack of resource for mental health, for physical health. A lot of veterans who, just again, after serving, didn't have what they needed for their own resources, didn't have the ability to even understand their own regulation and their own PTSD or their own healing space. And this disrupts within us, to again, either bringing out violence or bringing out just a level of impulsivity that can't it isn't contained within the resources that individuals have. Um, so there's just they really are legit human people who are in these spaces, and again, especially the folks who have the ability to and choose to come to yoga are really looking for um, a different pathway, a different space. The individuals who are in the programs that I guide, um, some of them don't have access to another form of therapy, another form of other than going again from if there's some type of little a job or employment within the facility, but essentially waking up, being behind bars, maybe having an hour or two to be outside, you know, and there, it's not a leisurely day, but the percentage of individuals who are incarcerated as opposed to the percentage of individuals who are incarcerated and have access to therapy, to different groups, to advancing education, is really minimal. So being able to, and for the folks who are coming in, are really recognizing that there's something within this practice that's healing, that provides support. And, talk about the individuals who sort of look at you kind of cross-eyed to be like, why yoga there? What is that? The type of yoga, the methodology of Prison Yoga Project, it does not look like a studio yoga. That yes, we eventually get into some more traditional postures, but it's much more the science of the practice and the philosophy of the practice that's really most beneficial. But for you, for your listeners, for individuals coming in, the foundation of the practice of yoga is non-harm. It's ahimsa in Sanskrit, and to come in and to support a group of individuals with this foundational principle that here in this space, we work on reducing harm towards ourselves, harm towards others, and also the acknowledgement of harm. What harm has been endured in the lives of these individuals from childhood, but then also what harm has been contributed to, what harm has been actually performed by these folks, and how to start to work through that, how to find a deep level of accountability, but also a place of healing, healing for victims who are involved, and to be able to, again, have that deep place of empathy and compassion and accountability, to start to heal collectively. There are not a lot of, in our country, and I know Canada does this better, but in the States, there's a lot of people incarcerated, and very, very, very few of them are serving a life sentence, but also during that time are not exposed to a lot of different healing modalities, that there's still so many facilities where it is much more of a punishment model than a rehabilitative model. And a lot of what we do going in is how can we bring more of that support and rehabilitation? And again, a conversation to have, again, the realities of where, and I don't investigate, I don't ask why people are there. Some you just know because they're, everything is public record. But when I'm in that room as a facilitator and I'm sharing space with folks who are interested in their own recovery, their own healing, their own journey with the practice of yoga, they become, the participants of the practice. And the focus is, and how can we collectively understand this harm that we hold in within ourselves, and to start to release that. We talk a lot about archaeology in a lot of these yoga practices, that sometimes we're carrying, again, what we've lived through in our life, but also the knowledge of what we've contributed to in the lives of others. And many of them have caused harm to family members and in their community, and are really working through finding a pathway forward and preparing to be able to go back into community, coming from a place of service. We call it in a lot of our programs going from survival mode to service mode, where people are just reacting and acting, and very often that it has a harmful consequence. But to then recognize that and realize sort of that state of just complete dysregulation, to the point of, again, outward harm, to then have such a healing practice that the motivation then comes to paying it forward, to going back, and to really making amends within community too, to show up in service for others, and to share these tools.
You've said so many things in there, but what there's a couple of things. All people are human beings, sentient beings with emotions, with feelings. And one of the things that I've learned from taking the Prison Yoga Project is when you understand the context, you understand the behavior. And I was familiar with the ACE study before, but the Prison Yoga Project allowed me to apply it. Can you talk a little bit about the adverse childhood events study and how that really factors in to a lot of the prison population?
Oh, absolutely. So, yeah, a study adverse childhood experiences, and it's adjusted and has evolved as well as we realize more of these kind of experiences that really do impact self. But essentially, if an individual experienced harm, any type of abuse, if they were unhoused through any type of period, or just inconsistently housed, food insecurity, again, witnessing the abuse of someone else, different substance misuse, kind of goes on and on. But all of these things that, again, truly disrupt an individual's life, and creating these spaces where, again, your safety is compromised, but also your perception. You're thinking too, as far as adverse childhood experiences happening within these developmental years of individuals who, are still learning how to show up in the world, learning how to communicate with one another, how to regulate themselves, and when there's just these sort of continued, again, abuse, continued lack, continued, you know, need, coming into space, also partnered with, without the resources of, this is your nervous system being dysregulated, or, you have the ability to be able to control your own impulses and not just harm someone because you're angry, or these things, and coming into space. So it's, and again, I don't have the studies right in front of me, so I apologize ahead of time, but
No,
please
don't.
look into the research. But essentially, if there's usually about 10 to 12, and again, I know that they've added food insecurity. That was not part of the original ACE study. But sort of say if you've experienced, 2 or 3 in your life, you have a reduction of even your own longevity and your own health. A lot of other comorbid factors come in. Chances of being incarcerated increase, and the more ACEs, the more experiences, the more struggles, the more potential harms and difficulties, and just ability to connect with yourself, to connect with one another, to form healthier relationships, really come in. And combining that with sort of the autonomic nervous system, and being again in this constant space of fight or flight survival mode. We're also animals, we're humans, but we also have, these responses where everything that we take in truly becomes part of our experience. So if you are always searching for food, you're going to come to a different level of desperation, and try to acquire what you need. You then add, substance on top of that, or then really reacting to the way that substance is altering our brain chemistry and our hormones, that, it just creates this continued, just, I don't even want to say bubble, but this continued environment of just adding fuel to the fire of disconnect, of dysregulation, of dissociation, from self, from others, and it inspires more fear, more, sometimes a little more ego, sometimes a little more aversion to things, less likely to continue to push our own learning and our own education, leaving people more susceptible, to all types of harm. So it's, we don't follow it directly, but it's an important thing to recognize, both for folks who are serving, folks who are going in. A lot of times, if you look even at officers and law enforcement and individuals who serve in the military, also have pretty high ACE scores. And where is that sort of parallel of, everyone being in this environment together, all kind of working through their own survival strategies? It's a really volatile, reactionary environment. And to be able to bring in, again, these tools that sometimes the word yoga, again, has its own social and social media and societal words attached to it. But essentially, it's, you know, can we pause for a moment? Can we connect with ourselves? Can we notice our reactions before they become, significant reactions and responses? But that foundation, coming in to say, yeah, again, you've endured harm. and this is maybe how you're carrying it with you. Again, I said before, we talk a lot about archaeology, where there's so often that truly, the body does keep the score, Dr. Bessel van der
Mhm.
Kolk's book, um, because we are having that. Every experience that you had lives within you. Again, if you've had this desperation or all the things, and now I'm starting to ramble, but essentially, to be able to start to understand, sometimes for a lot of these folks for the first time, to have someone sort of say, as a child, your rights, your autonomy, your safety was taken from you, was never present, and to really grow up and try to thrive in an environment where you are in that constant survival mode. And then as you grow up, you continue to not have resources, um, and where a lot of individuals again end up finding themselves incarcerated. Um,
Yeah.
and being able to trace back and go through, again, where is that harm? And I say some of it, you can dig right out with a shovel and be like, yeah, I know exactly what happened then. And other times it's a little more nuanced, because that harm could come from a caregiver or someone that in our youth we trusted. And that changes also the way we show up in the world, and form relationships too.
Yeah, I don't think, and I appreciate that. Thank you. But I wanted to provide context as to the prison yoga project with, rehabilitation over punishment, because I get the sense that there's no one in the prison yoga project that's condoning the behavior. It's just putting a face to these individuals and saying, hey, you know what? We all have trauma, but that trauma that they experienced is something through my very privileged eyes. I have no idea. And it's not an excuse, but to be able to continue with that punishment, what if we were to change the course and offer that rehabilitation? And that's what draws me. I was going to say past tense, but that's what draws me to this work that you're doing, because it actually changed my eyes in that I see people for human beings and not as that, person that stands in front of me wearing Prada, or, that person standing in front of me who's housing insecure, who smokes constantly on the sidewalk or something. Each of us is a human being. So I thank you for the work that you're doing and recognizing this. Jen, one of the things that really opened my eyes as well is the racial inequities within the prison population. Um, how and I don't want to dive that much into this because I really want to get into the work that you're doing, but can you talk a little bit about the racial inequities that exist within, the prison population in the US, and in Canada, we are no different. So I'm not saying that we're perfect. Uh, uh, we certainly have racial inequality, but can you talk a little bit how that may factor into the prison populations that you deal with?
Yeah, and again, I will give my personal, this is not necessarily where prison yoga stands, but even in our foundational training, as we talk about the history of mass incarceration, that mass incarceration was adopted and adapted and designed to essentially continue to enslave individuals. This over over incarceration really started as a response to emancipation and coming into spaces where where vagrancy was illegal, but individuals had nowhere to go. And I think that there's this, Jackie, this can be a whole other podcast of just the racial fuckery of our country and these places of of want and need. And I just it's a much bigger piece. We certainly see a disgusting number of you know inconsistencies with individuals. There's certainly way disproportionately um, incarcerated folks in community, where there is a great deal of targeting. We see this in the news every single day of racial profiling and just these attacks and hunts that are very um, specific. I think back even to the ugly laws and things of banning humans in existence. So I feel like I don't even know where to fully address and answer the question, because it's such an issue and it's such a deep rooted, you know, disconnect in our whole country, where there are, sort of, you're talking about these privileged and entitled individuals coming into space. We talk a lot in yoga philosophy, you know, um, idea of moderation or non-excess is in Sanskrit brahmacharya. But I think it comes down to there are a lot of individuals who, let's say, are elected officials, who maybe don't fully recognize and hold their own accountability for their level of addiction to their own privilege and power. And that in turn causes so much harm to individuals who do not have privilege and power. And it absolutely turns into a racial thing. It absolutely turns into so much harm for anyone who could potentially threaten that position of power. Um, and
Yeah.
the product, mass incarceration is a product of that. It's keeping up with, you know, this strange human need of throwing people away, and just, yeah.
Yeah.
There's so
It,
many emotions in all of that,
yeah.
but it's a lot of why this program, the yoga teacher training that we teach, is called Yoga, Social Justice, and Leadership. And it really is looking at, our world, our communities through this lens of social justice, to dive into the roots of, you know, the philosophy of yoga, as thousands and thousands of years old, that really said, like, hey, humans, pay attention to how you're treating one another. Pay attention to the harm that you're inflicting and putting out there. Pay attention to attempting to honor the truth of who people are and where they've come from, and honoring that diversity, and honoring, just the brilliance of different cultures and different individuals. But again, yoga philosophy comes down to these things called the kleshas as well, that when you have this addiction to your own power, and when that's been part of your generational lore, everyone is a threat. And then your fear and your own ignorance and your own, ego and aversion and attachment to things really comes into play. And it harms individuals who, and I don't want to say that there's any non-privileged person who is vulnerable at all, but the system creates that vulnerability and creates that space of erasure and, sort of, just, again, creating and feeding into the fear of whatever causes people to again be afraid that they don't have enough to do. This
Yeah.
planet has more than enough for everyone.
Yeah.
But then again, the system of mass incarceration, I really think, is doing exactly what it was designed to do, of, again, throwing people away, of just, yeah, it's, again, a whole other conversation, and like, with a lot
Yeah.
more voices. We're both here as white ladies coming in and having this conversation, and that's not fair either. There's a lot of voices missing from this conversation as well as we come in. But from my perspective, from the work that we do, it's one of the biggest crimes against humanity within our globe, of the way
Yeah.
that we treat one another. And add this level of incarceration where there's no support, no help. Yeah, so
Yeah. And it was probably really unfair for me to ask that question, but it was just such a big part of the prison yoga project that, again, opened my eyes so much. And you're right, two white, women sitting here having this conversation. But, I wasn't ignoring you. I was just, this quote I came across the other day from John Kabat-Zinn, and he had said, it wasn't until I was in my 70s that I began to realize that my own life trajectory benefited from my color, who is a white individual. So I think it's important for me to recognize that those people in front of me, there are so many different stories that in my yoga mat. So I assume it's the same with you when you're teaching. But Jen, I wanted to paint a picture of what it was like to be in prison, who people who are incarcerated, what's kind of like their life in prison, who they are. But I want to talk a little bit about the Prison Yoga Project and why yoga. Like you've touched on that a lot, but many people come to my yoga classes, they start their watch, they burn their calories, and it's not the same yoga class, and people are there for different reasons. So can you talk to me a little bit about what maybe a why yoga and what a typical prison yoga project looks like, and how is that different from your typical 60-minute yoga class at my studio?
Yeah, well, I haven't been to your studio, so I'm not going to make assumptions, but I have
You're
been to a
more than
lot of
welcome to come
studios.
at any
I know,
time.
I'm so excited. I definitely want to. Um, Again, for what we're offering, the foundational lineage of this practice is truly a gift to support the human experience. That, from again, from its deep roots is really talk. It's not about can you put your body into this pose. It's much more about how do you want to show up as a human on this planet, and that I think sometimes is not always celebrated in social media, in people's eyes of what this practice is. That there is a lot of, I think, crime against the practice of yoga, even within the yoga community, of highlighting it as something performative, and it is not, in its truest form. So it goes hand in hand with trauma recovery, with rehabilitation, with healing in general. Again, where our programs focus really heavily on supporting individuals to understand the philosophy in a self-contemplative way. And then we bring in the breath and the movement to help support, discharging that excess energy that trauma can bring in. So a typical, program, we usually will try to do almost an introductory pilot program where we're when we can. Sometimes there's a more transient population, you're sort of seeing new individuals each time, but a lot of programs in a more long-term facility like a prison, you can kind of support the same group of people. So we start by just, what is this practice of yoga? Giving a little bit of indications of, again, the definition of union, and starting by reminding individuals that they're a whole complete person in this moment. As we start and introduce here, that yoga is sort of framed in its most common translation of being sort of the mind, body, and spirit coming together. Well, trauma-informed yoga says our mind and our body and our relationship to whatever spirit might mean to us probably had some kind of trauma in it. So how do we dive into what has our mind endured? What has our body endured? What has our place in the world, been compromised, whether that be in erasure of our culture, just inconsistencies in our religious upbringing, a lot of different things that can really cause harm for someone. And really starting with this kind of root, and then also adding the science of pranayama or breathing practices, that we do have a great deal of power within this meat suit that we travel in to support regulation. And the more we can begin to understand where we are dysregulated, where we're in those survival modes, and start to come back online. So the first class is really talking about, again, we're going for this union. We have this power within this nervous system regulation and understanding of mindfulness. So by starting to kind of build these skills of, for everyone, for people listening, for you personally, have you ever been angry or upset? And then if you really think about it, your heart rate changes, maybe the temperature of your body changes. There's a different embodied sensation as well, that your whole self is having that emotion or that feeling. And we really try to make connections into that, to support individuals to pause and notice what's going on, to then sort of choose the response to that. And this supports reactionary reactions. That is not a technical term.
Yeah.
Again, to sort of say, wow, I'm feeling some things. And we talk about that emotions are part of our human experience as well. But if we get stuck in any one emotion, we're not regulated. Even happiness all the time is not okay. We need to be able to be angry or sad or emote in these different ways. So that's kind of our first class is really this introduction. And then we do go through some movements where the other piece of it is that not just individuals who are incarcerated, but individuals who have experienced trauma probably don't have a very trusting relationship with themselves. So we also are supporting building that relationship with self and really working on cultivating self-compassion and empathy that then goes outward. A lot of times, we say all the time, hurt people, but healing people can start to see people. And there's a lot of that foundation that folks are not always at a place and ready to have that accountability or to really understand the impact of their actions. And through these practices, we work on it. So then the next week, we focus specifically on energy. How are you carrying your energy? Are you lethargic? Are you super anxious? And what are some somatic tools and techniques to be able to start to support that regulation? We go through a whole class on that and the way that we move, and that turns into sometimes there's some running in place and some jumping jacks and things, again, to stimulate that activation and then to be able to have that counter of regulation. Then the next week we move through emotional and physical range of motion. So what is your capacity for your body, but then also what is an emotional capacity and emotional range of motion as well. Centering and somatics, we work on a little bit on strength. We work on more of coordination and focus as well that really supports folks who, again, might be overwhelmed or working with a lot of things. How can we start to support people to repair the relationship they have with their own self and then turn that inward healing into outward and collective healing? So after we kind of usually do, again, like an 8-week pilot, kind of reevaluate surveys to ask the individuals, what's resonating, what's working, what's not, what do you need more of? And then months, sometimes years in, the classes could start to look a little bit more like a traditional practice if it's appropriate for the individuals there. I just taught a class yesterday, and we're just about at a year with a group of incarcerated men. But we've done that, and now they're starting to have language around, we really had this type of experience, or we got this type of news, or I'm prepping for this hearing. So I'm feeling a lot of anxiety or a lot of things, and the classes are really sort of customized to support that language. A lot of listening, and I think sometimes studio yoga isn't always listening. Sometimes it's more, again, not performative, but it's more, the facilitator has an idea and people come to class and this is what's taught. And our classes are very participant driven and participant led. So we always start with a check-in, where are we at today? What do we need today? Go through the practice. And then we always end with a checkout as well. And an acknowledgement of one another, to grow these tiny communities within, the macrocosm of the prison, to start that healing from within. Yeah, so that's the very fast version of what they are, but essentially.
Yeah, I'm a visual person, but one of the things that struck me was my typical yoga class is that inverted U, where you've got that peak and then you bring it down. But with the Prison Yoga Project, it's these little tiny oscillating waves of up and bring you down, and then up and then bring you down, because it's completely different. And even having that trauma-informed approach, like the invitational language, instead of do this, it was, if you don't feel like it today, then don't. Or, being sensitive to downward dog's not for everybody. And there's reasons why. Or happy baby may not be the greatest pose for a women's class or something like that.
For so many people, that there is a lot of postures that are inaccessible. And again, part of being a facilitator going into these spaces is that deep ability to really recognize where have people been into, especially folks who have been practicing yoga for a long time, where a down dog is totally natural, to come into a room where, you know, regardless of the gender of the individual, there might have been some type of abuse or some type of, again, just intimidation or some type of thing where, not only is another person looking at you, but the way we position ourselves in the room is really important. What we're asking of individuals to put their body in, even something like a tabletop position, a hands and knees position, can be incredibly difficult and vulnerable. Not only because of what the position is sort of exposing a vulnerable posterior, but physically, individuals might not have the physical mobility to be on a cement floor, on a tiny mat, on hands and knees as well. So there is a great deal of consideration, which again is why a lot of our starting, for the first few months, it's much more of that range of motion movement, of sort of starting to understand some of these shapes. But let's first become familiar with or reacquainted with how our bodies work, and what does that feel like. There's a lot of folks who do have exposure to some type of fitness, but a lot of times it's very repetitive motion, or or running or walking, or lifting weights, but in kind of the same plane of movement and not having that variety. So even just to be able to support folks to move a little bit differently. And as you may know, and as your listeners probably know, sometimes those emotions are stuck in different parts of our body, and we can, twist a certain way, and all of a sudden there's a lot of emotion there. And so there's also a lot more disclaimers of preparing folks for what they might experience coming into a yoga class that I think doesn't always come out in a lot of studio facilities where, you don't always say, hey, we're going to be doing some things today. If you might feel emotional, or you might cry, or you might have you might have anger that comes out of nowhere. And to be able to be proactive about that education as well is a big part of our programs too, and really supporting individuals to then also have the skills. And you talked about sort of that wave. It's that, again, that intentional sort of guided stimulation, and then supported self-soothing. So how can we really notice what's going on in our mind, our body, our emotions, and then be able to have that, again, that pause and response time to be able to act accordingly. And that invitational language also deepens those mindfulness skills. So again, this might be this, but what do you notice for yourself when you do this, and really guide individuals to find what's appropriate for them?
Yeah, I love the fact that, it's such a healing modality, and the Prison Yoga Project has really taken this and run with all of the neuroscience and the psychoneuroimmunological stuff that goes on with it. I absolutely love it. And we can read papers and take the evidence and bring it in, but one of the things that really struck me was the stories of people who've been incarcerated, and I'm stigmatizing because I see one man and he's got tattoos and he's big, and I think he's bald. If I were to stereotype and say, yeah, he's a prisoner, but he was so kind and gentle in his conversations, who is actually teaching yoga now. So can you talk a little bit about the coming into a prison? How was that met? And some of the changes that you may have seen with individuals.
Yeah, I mean, that's what it's all about. All of the stories are of that. And I think, to be a facilitator in this type of environment, one of the most important things, in training future facilitators and preparing myself, that there has to be a great deal of self-work in really working through our own judgments, our own biases, our own places of where we're coming in. And, I say very, very often with new groups of individuals, just even doing an activity of picturing the people, like you said, picture the people in your community, um, and everyone, who's there and what do they look like and what are they doing, and people will make that list. And now all of these people come into your yoga class, you know, is there anyone here who you don't feel comfortable serving and supporting? And to really do that internal work first, before going in to any, I mean, studio included, to go into any space where if there's an individual based on how they look or their size or their skin color or their, religious affiliations or their gender, all the ways that, again, humans harm one another with judgment. How can you prepare yourself that you are a safe and welcoming environment for folks who are coming to you for healing? And that's essentially what we are as facilitators. So before even going in, we need to do a lot of self-work. That for me, it's, to really keep my own boundaries. It is important to have that space of, I'm coming in with a very specific set of skills and a very specific reason that I'm there as a yoga facilitator. I'm there to share a trauma-informed version of this practice. But I'm also here to support the healing journey of another person, regardless of what that person has done. In no way, shape, or form am I supported or supporting what those individuals had done, but I am supporting the fact that they're seeing enough of themselves and accountability for, again, harm caused, that they're choosing to do something to bring their own healing about, to deepen their own accountability. So I think what has been most magical, I don't know, there's just, I think it's those places where folks start to soften for the first time. And, there's, and I alluded to this before, that there's, facilities where a very small percentage of individuals have access to programming or have access to therapies. And I'm at a facility now where really only a few months in with a new group, but the individuals are in sort of their general population and do not have access to other types of therapy. There's some rec time, there's, again, there's sort of jobs within a facility, but there's no one other than themselves to talk to or to be able to have those additional skills. So, the first couple of weeks of coming in, there's a lot of sussing me out and, not wanting to maybe even sometimes connect, because I think that there's also volunteers and individuals who come into spaces who don't have the longevity to be able to stay there. So a lot of times individuals in these programs don't want to connect or let go or let their guard down because they don't know that this program is going to stay. So there's a lot of sort of skepticism of it. But as that sort of trust starts to build, as individuals can see that I show up every day, that I'm coming in consistently and that I'm seeing them for who they are, and not with the label of, an incarcerated individual, not with the label of, again, rapist, murderer, all the things of why these folks may be there, that I'm seeing a person who is seeking out healing and seeking out, again, a pathway to accountability, a pathway to bringing themselves into a place where they're comfortable within their own head and body and are then, being able to push that forward. So some of the things, this just happened a couple of weeks ago as well in a group. Again, this is a group of general population individuals who don't have the space. And during one of our checkouts, one individual who's typically pretty quiet, disclosed his own history of abuse, in a way that wasn't harmful to the group, but was just like an aha moment within his own experience where it's like, I'm just realizing now as a, a 40 plus year old individual, how much of this harm and sickness and shame and guilt I really actually am carrying inside, and how much anger then caused me to do what I did to other people. And it was just these little clicks of time, and then got very sort of stoic and quiet, and I think a little surprised by his own willingness to share. Everyone was quiet for a moment, and then the person next to him said, "Yeah, man, like I have that lived experience too." And then someone across the room. And it turned into this, like, I'm getting chills talking about it, but it turned into this, this moment of, again, this wasn't a male facility, and a group of men who, again, big and tattooed and, or, just needing for their own preservation as well to continue to have this very, strong, intimidating facade. It sort of sloughed away, and everyone was healing in that moment and sharing these deep experiences. And then to come back and to tie it to the practice of yoga and to work through it. And then to kind of recognize, well, now we have a new energy that we're holding with us. And how do we address that in real time and have these skills to push forward? And those are the things that happen constantly. I am the type of facilitator where I do encourage communication and talking. That's not always how, our programs work. But I appreciate when folks can share. But that's where the magic is. It didn't happen because someone did a warrior too. It was, it was sort of after the fact of like, holy shit, like this, like, oh my gosh, this is starting to shift some things that I've held on to for a long time that I didn't even know that I was. And also making a direct connection to why I did the things that I did that harmed someone else. And then, community builds and supporting one another. So it's those stories and it's those moments where that vulnerability goes away. I also love, 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 love when anyone falls asleep at the end of class. Like, just to be in, again, this very continually harsh environment, to know that we're creating a space together, that the individuals for that hour and a half of time have a sense of peace to, again, on a cement floor, to fall asleep. And then also to not ridicule one another, to support one another, and to gently sort of, for the the individuals next to them, to kind of gently nudge them awake rather than mocking them, or calling them some kind of name for falling asleep. Or there's the sense of community that continues to grow, and the way that they're not only seeing themselves but seeing one another. A lot of times in men's facilities, the way that because there's another realization as well, that as a woman going into a male facility, there's a lot of individuals who have committed egregious crimes against women, that to go into that space and as a woman be able to establish a very firm and clear boundary, but also provide skills, provide empathy and support, but maintain those boundaries and maintain that space of a healthy relationship. A lot of them who have abused women have been abused by women, and there's just a lot of things that kind of come into this cycle, and that certainly happens in the other facilities as well. But that's another piece too, where it's just sort of that gender healing and gender roles and conversations that we can talk about, of that kind of expectation too. There's a lot of magic that happens in these spaces coming in.
I'm sometimes very glad that we're not on video, because as you were having, which I'm sure you could tell, which you were having your goosebumps, I was having tears. Like, what a beautiful, supportive, softening again, I go back to modality, but to give to people who may never have experienced a pat on the shoulder with love and affection, who may have grown up in in an environment where there was constant mocking, where showing your feelings was a sign of weakness. And here, the healing takes place in an environment whereby you would expect to have lots of mocking and negativity, but it's softening. It's softening that's occurring. I love it.
Yeah, much more than that. And again, not in every environment, but the support, the disclosure of the different individuals of, really the point of crisis that they were in within their own life. Again, whether they're there for a substance charge or there for a violent charge, really consistently talking of sort of that breaking moment, and not being saved by being incarcerated, but so many people say it's it's really frustrating to find this practice that I had to come to prison to have these tools and these
Yeah.
resources and
Yeah.
coming into this space. But it is there and it is present and it is happening. Yeah, and it's just I think it's the bigger picture, like you said, that the pictures that we offer, and Robert Sturman, our photographers, does a brilliant, beautiful job of really capturing the humanity of the individuals who are in these spaces. But I think that there's still a long way to go of shifting the cultural stigma,
Mm.
for everyone. I mean, just for humans in general, there's a lot of work
Yeah.
to be done. But the more we can bring in that human aspect, but also, again, push the healing and really support why are we there? And it is not to do that warrior pose.
Yeah. Yeah. Jen, I love the fact that you've said the word serve a lot, which again is one of the things I learned from the Prison Yoga Project, the difference between serve and help. So I'm going to ask this question because I think it's really important that the work you're doing is being honored by others, because you were recently honored with the Leadership Award from the New Hampshire Department of Corrections at their volunteer appreciation banquet. What did that mean to you?
It was really overwhelming. Honestly, I can say that was they didn't tell me ahead of time.
Oh
Um,
no.
there was just so just went to a volunteer banquet, which was amazing that they do. There's so many, and I don't think that this is unique to New Hampshire, but a lot of support in a lot of facilities do come from what volunteers are able to do. A lot of programming. So I'm just listening like everyone else to, wow, this is this great award, and they're talking about some person who's, coming in and being able to bring these leadership skills and thinking, wow, this is a really great program. And then they say my name. And I, was, um, I love talking about this work, but I do not like talking about myself. And it was very overwhelming, but really beautiful. I think where, for me being a lifelong resident of this state, that what I'm able to do and contribute to in New Hampshire. Again, from my grandfather being a counselor in youth corrections to my father serving time, um, that it was such a piece of um, just a lot of gratitude for. I actually am establishing a relationship with the department as well, and that for whatever my own opinions are of the carceral system, and things that I had shared before, that to have me as a representative of yoga and trauma recovery and healing be recognized by the Department of Corrections, I think was such a huge and really motivational shift in the focus of you know punitive versus restorative justice, and that they could have honored anyone. There's a lot of programs that are really beneficial. But I think that recognition, to me really meant a lot, that they are seeing the value, that the administration, that individuals who are have lifelong careers in corrections and the carceral system are again seeing the value of the programs that Prison Yoga Project is bringing in, and seeing not only again the healing benefits, but that this practice of yoga and the way that we're sharing this methodology does support people to find that healing and that leadership within themselves. Truly does bring that sort of survival to service model into fruition. So it was, super overwhelming. I was crazy awkward at the banquet. I think I was just like, thank you, and couldn't even think of something to say in this giant gym full of people. So that, like, we'll leave that moment out, because I was like the most awkward of all tacos going into just a crazy place there. But um, the feeling that I have the award right next to me on my desk, um, yeah, it was just a really a special moment. And I think getting that also created a lot more pathways to be able to, we were able to grow 2 more programs after that banquet. And I think for other facilities where they're all the DOC, but maybe it wasn't on their radar, we're more apt to say, oh, we've heard about that. Why don't you come in and try a program here as well? So it just gave a lot more traction to the programs too, where, that was 8 years into, just really trying and showing up and, look what we're doing. Again, and not in a way that's like, look at me, but in a like, this, I think we're doing something really special and really supportive. So again, that recognition was pretty powerful to come
Yeah.
in.
And certainly to have that recognition from the Department of Corrections, it just shows how amazing this program is. And I'm not going to, out anybody, but the last online course I took, there was an individual there who was a sheriff, who was taking part in the prison yoga project, which led me to believe that individuals who are boots on the ground in the prison system are actually like, hey, I need to know a little bit more about this. I mean, I don't know if this is a common thing. I just saw this one individual, but it made me believe that what you guys are doing is being recognized by so many. And that's why I wanted to acknowledge the fact that, as you said, this is a big deal that the Department of Corrections is recognizing, hey, this is something that we can use. Jen, can you talk about the Prison Yoga Project? Because it is worldwide. The courses I have taken, part of the online courses with people from Europe. I'm Canadian. There was another Canadian there. So its tentacles are reaching far. What is the Prison Yoga Project? And what are kind of the goals of the Prison Yoga Project?
And essentially, it's a supporting a cultural shift and looking at rehabilitation over punishment and supporting, not only facilities, but the individuals who are experiencing that, the tools to recover and to heal. We have programs in 11 different countries and 22 different US states. And like you said, the individuals who are coming in are, formerly incarcerated individuals who found benefit to the programs and now want to give back and serve. Officers who, again, are recognizing that the individuals who are exposed to yoga are having more successful reentry. And even for individuals who have life sentences are finding more peace within themselves and are, healing within, even if they may not be returning citizens. Uh, a lot of teachers and therapists and kind of beyond the culture, called the carceral system as well, where the teacher training that we offer is, again, really supporting folks who have experienced trauma. So we're seeing more and more just a shift in, again, changing that stigma of what the practice of yoga is, but also delivering, evidence-based practice that is supporting recovery. And how can we bring this in through, again, an embodied practice where folks are not only having, either exposure to kind of a more cerebral or talk-based therapy, but really recognizing this work is much more effective when we can address the whole person, the whole self. Um, so, we offer our trainings, we offer our in-facility programs, but a lot of it is, also where we're advocates for a shift in how individuals are incarcerated, how individuals who have experienced trauma are being exposed to practices that may be beneficial. And we have a lot of additional training programs specific for corrections staff, both, civilians and officers. Working more with courts as well, that are starting to begin to recognize the value of this work also, and are starting to even add, that the yoga program is part of the sentence, because, again, seeing that this exposure to this practice is so beneficial for an individual's journey. So it's you know when James Fox, I think, started doing this work in 2002, I think he just wanted to serve and support, with seeing, his own work that he was doing in supporting young men, and then bringing this into San Quentin prison. And now, 25 years later, I don't think he even imagined, and thousands of global programs and participants and support of coming in. We're working a lot more with facilities. I actually just met with the commissioner early this morning, which I don't know if I could say, but that was pretty magic. But again, starting to see these cultural shifts where there's a lot of communities who are maybe starting to recognize that this old, outdated model of harm and punishment is not serving anyone. It's certainly not serving the environment of the carceral system. It's not making it safe for the individuals who are living there or working there. And it's certainly not supporting community when individuals are returning back. So we're hoping, and I think participating in an active cultural shift to really looking at trauma recovery from a place of personal empowerment, but then also that collective healing as well. So I want to continue to reiterate that yes, we're supporting incarcerated individuals, but we absolutely are also supporting women's groups and places and sober communities and places where individuals who may have been impacted by the harms and the crimes of the individuals we serve on the inside are also being served. And we don't always promote that as much, that we're showing up just as much for victims as well, and coming into these spaces. So I believe very strongly in this practice of yoga, which again has had, doesn't necessarily have the reputation it deserves, as this, deep healing modality that honors humans and pushes towards more resources for everyone in coming into this space. So, yeah.
Jen, I can't thank you enough. And just, I'm always sensitive to the time, but one last question just to reflect upon. As someone who has experienced incarceration from both a familial perspective and as a yoga instructor and trauma facilitator, what would you like people to know about those who are incarcerated?
I think just the reminder that, again, these are every single person who's there is someone's child, someone's relative, part of their own journey. And, for folks who are coming through these programs are really working hard to understand themselves, to understand what they experienced within their own family, and certainly understanding how they contributed to the harm of others. And by showing up in these different programs and classes and doing this work, is inspiring. There's a lot of places where, again, there's human people everywhere, and to just to maybe pause and look around and examine our own biases and assumptions as we approach everywhere, not just the carceral setting, but the road rage on the road, or getting mad if someone's in line in front of you in the supermarket. It's just this collective place of pausing and recognizing our own embodied reactions to things, and doing to the best of our ability, reducing harm in our thoughts, words, and actions towards ourselves and others. And that's what we say over and over and over again. But how profound would that be if our human family did that? Really, really worked to reduce harm in our thoughts, words, and actions towards ourselves and others, and provide for one another, rather than, really examining those places of privilege and addiction that sometimes are socially acceptable, in coming into space. So a little more yoga for the world, it might be beneficial. But yeah, to, again, more empathy, more compassion, more understanding, but also recognizing that, everyone in the situation deserves support. And that's what we hope to be able to offer and to do and to contribute to.
Jen, I honestly, I can't thank you enough. And when I say, I'm not being histrionic when I say this, but the Prison Yoga Project, my certificate of completion is on my wall. I love it. I should frame it because it means so much to me. And the work that you guys are doing is truly, I'm shouting this from the rafters. Anyone who cares to listen, I tell them about the Prison Yoga Project. And if you, listener, are interested, I will put the links in the show notes, because I strongly encourage you to check it out because it truly has been life-changing for me. So Jen, thank you so much for your time, for your passion, and for your willingness to serve. It's truly awe-inspiring.
Thank you so much, Jackie. Thank you to everyone listening here, but thank you so very much.
Thank you for listening to part 2 of this conversation with Jen Lindgren. Programs like those offered through Prison Yoga Project invite us to rethink the way we understand harm, accountability, and healing. Rather than seeing incarceration only through the lens of punishment, these approaches ask a deeper question. What happens when we address the trauma that so often sits beneath cycles of violence, addiction, and incarceration? The work Jen and her colleagues are doing reminds us that healing practices, breath, movement, awareness, are not luxuries. They are tools that can help people reconnect with themselves, regulate their nervous systems, and imagine different possibilities for their lives. More than 90% of incarcerated individuals will eventually return to their communities, which means that the healing that happens inside these spaces will have ripple effects far beyond prison walls. If this conversation resonated with you, please share the episode. These stories help expand the conversation about trauma-informed care, restorative justice, and the role embodied practices can play in healing individuals and communities. You can learn more about Jen Lindgren and the work of the Prison Yoga Project in the show notes. It is my heartfelt thanks to those individuals who are supporting the show. It is through your generosity that keeps this show going. If you would like to be a guest on The Inner Practice, or simply have a comment or a story to share, I would love to hear from you. If you enjoyed this show and any other episodes, feel free to buy me a coffee to support this show. You can find the link in the show notes. Until next time, I'm your host, Jackie Vandertuin, inviting you to pause, take a breath, and return to your inner practice.